Do not, I repeat, do not try to justify a shortcut with the amount of experience you have. Accidents pay no heed to the number of years under your belt. Not really convinced? Well, let me tell you a story. A story about a man whose name you probably will never forget.
Mr. Farsen was his name. He was the happiest man in town. It wasn't long before he was set to retire after 30 years of hard work. But it was satisfying work. He was considered a subject matter expert and was handsomely paid by his company for that. A couple of months before his long-awaited retirement, he was assigned a job to recertify an LPG tank. It was a piece of cake for good old Mr. Farsen. He's done it at least 1,000 times before. So on a sunny Saturday morning, Mr. Farsen and his son-in-law set out for the simple task. To recertify a tank, one has to obviously get rid of the fuel contained in the tank first, which involves several steps, the last of which entails filling the tank with water and burning the gas that's pushed out. As the clock hit noon on that tranquil Saturday, Mr. Farsen and his son-in-law started to get hungry. So they agreed that the son-in-law would head into town to get some lunch, and Mr. Farsen would continue the last step of emptying the tank. In order to speed things up, and because he had 30 years of solid experience to back his decisions, Mr. Farsen decided to take an innocent shortcut. Procedure stated that the hose used to fill the LPG tank with water should be connected to an external water tap, basically one out in the open so that it can be seen at all times. Instead, Mr. Farsen connected the hose to a tap inside the client's plant where it was practically out of sight. As Mr. Farsen sat near the tank enjoying his newspaper out in the sun, the fitting on the tap inside the plant came off and the hose fell to the ground. This caused the water that was already filled in the tank to siphon back into the plant, and LPG gas followed suit. We now had flammable fuel in the presence of oxygen. There was one missing ingredient for a Big Bang, an ignition source. And that came in the form of a switchgear inside the plant. The resulting explosion ripped through the site and killed Mr. Farsen instantly. Thankfully, it was a Saturday, so there was nobody at work, otherwise the result would have been catastrophic. Although this is a perfect example of how taking shortcuts could lead to disastrous outcomes, there's one important point in the story that makes it one worth remembering. Mr. Farsen was not only a subject matter expert when it came to LPG, he actually sat on the board in his country that came up with the national rules and regulations on the subject. The rule he broke was actually a rule he was part of writing. So the next time you try to justify a shortcut with the amount of experience you have, remember Mr. Farsen's story. Remember that accidents can happen to the best of us.